Welcome to Moonlit Inc. BL. Let's begin today's story. Chapter 1, The Walking PR Disaster. The scent of expensive Santal 33 and bitter espresso usually preceded Cross Miller into a room, acting as a warning siren for anyone with a soul. He stepped out of the black Cadillac Escalade, his boots clicking sharply against the asphalt of the studio lot. The morning sun caught the sharp angles of his jawline, a face that had sold millions of perfumes and movie tickets, yet currently looked like it wanted to set the world on fire. "I'm not doing it," Cross said, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. "You're already here, Cross." "The cameras start rolling in 20 minutes, replied Marcus, his agent, who was walking 3 paces behind him and sweating through a designer suit. The board of directors was very clear. Either you do this down-to-earth variety show, or they pull the funding for your directorial debut. The public thinks you're a narcissist, Cross. We need approachable. We need humble." Cross stopped in his tracks, spinning around so fast Marcus nearly tripped. "I am a narcissist, Marcus. It's what pays for your mortgage. And humble is for people who don't have 3 Academy Award nominations before the age of 28. He looked around the set of the background. It was a sprawling outdoor lot designed to look like a chaotic film production hub. There were no luxury trailers in sight, only rows of canvas tents and communal folding chairs. Disgusting, Cross thought, his lip curling. I'm supposed to play house with people who stand in the back of my scenes for $50 a day. They entered the production office, a cramped, air-conditioned trailer where the CEO of the network, Mr. Han, sat waiting. "Ah, our star," Mr. Han said, not looking up from his tablet. "I trust you've read the contract. 2 weeks. No assistants, no private chefs, no filtered water from the Alps. You live, eat, and work with the extras. If you walk off set once, the news of your incident at the gala last month goes from a rumor to a confirmed headline with video proof." Cross felt a vain throb in his temple. The incident, a drunken argument with a director that ended with a shattered glass and a few choice words, was a ticking time bomb. "I want a private bathroom," Cross demanded, slamming his palms on the desk. "You'll share the porta-potties like the rest of the humans," Mr. Han replied coldly. "Go to wardrobe. They have a jumpsuit waiting for you. It's polyester." Cross marched toward the communal dressing area, his inner monologue a vitriolic stream of consciousness. "Polyester? I'll break out in hives. This is a PR stunt designed by masochists. I'll make them regret this. I'll make every single person on this set wish they'd never been born." As he entered the dressing tent, the air was thick with the smell of cheap hairspray and body odor. Dozens of extras were bustling about, fitting into generic guard uniforms and civilian clothes. When Cross entered, the room went dead silent. He didn't acknowledge them. He didn't even look at them. To Cross, they were just blurry shapes in the background of his life. "Who's in charge of this stable?" Cross shouted. A young production assistant scurried over, trembling. Mr. Miller. Here is your gear. You've been assigned to the hauling and rigging team for the first 3 days. Hauling. Cross repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. "I don't haul things. I am the thing people haul things for." He snatched the gray jumpsuit from the assistant's hands. It felt scratchy and cheap. He looked at a group of extras whispering nearby and snapped, "If I see a single phone camera pointed at me, I will sue you into the next century. Am I clear?" The extras scattered like mice. Cross stood by the mirror, struggling with the zipper of the jumpsuit. His reflection looked back at him, still hauntingly beautiful, but his eyes were dark with a simmering rage. He felt like a caged animal. 2 weeks, he told himself. 2 weeks of playing man of the people, and then I go back to my penthouse and never look at another commoner again. He stormed out to the assembly area, where the sun was already beating down. He demanded a parasol, but the crew ignored him, citing the show's no special treatment rule. He sat on a crate, his arms crossed, radiating a literal aura of, "Don't touch me." Around him, the extras, the aspiring actors, the dreamers, the people who actually wanted to be there, were chatting and laughing. He noticed one guy a few yards away, a tall, muscular man with broad shoulders who was helping an older woman carry a heavy equipment bag. The guy wasn't looking at Cross. He wasn't whispering or pointing. He was just, working. Cross scoffed and looked away. Probably just an actor playing nice guy for the cameras. "Everyone here has an agenda. Mr. Miller," the director shouted through a megaphone. "Pick up those cables. We're moving to stage 4. Cross didn't move. He just stared at the director until the man looked away. He was Cross Miller. He might be here, but he wouldn't be cooperative. Little did he know, the man with the broad shoulders was already watching the back of his head with a look of mild, quiet curiosity. Chapter 2, The Falling Star. The humidity on day 3 was a physical weight, thick enough to make the cheap polyester of Cross's jumpsuit cling to his skin like a second, suffocating layer. The air smelled of hot dust, diesel from the generators, and the salty tang of sweat, a scent Cross usually only experienced through a filtered lens, never as a participant. Cross. The crates. Now, the floor manager barked. Cross didn't even blink. He was perched on a folding director's chair he'd effectively hijacked from a stunned intern, his legs crossed elegantly at the ankles. He looked less like a laborer and more like a displaced prince witnessing a peasant revolt. "If I move, I'll pass out from sheer indignity," Cross thought, watching a bead of sweat roll down his temple. "Let them bark. My contract says I have to be here, it doesn't say I have to be useful." A few yards away, the rigging crew was struggling. Among them was the tall man Cross had noticed earlier. Up close, the guy was an anomaly. While the other extras were busy trying to catch the camera's eye with spontaneous smiles or dramatic sighs, this man moved with a quiet, mechanical efficiency. His name tag read Hajin, though Cross hadn't deigned to read it yet. Hajin was currently hauling a massive crate of lighting cables, the muscles in his forearms roping and flexing under a layer of grit. He wiped his brow with the back of a gloved hand, his expression unreadable, not angry, not tired, just present. How can someone be that focused on moving boxes? Cross wondered, a flick of irritation hitting him. He doesn't even look like he's trying to get discovered. He's ruining the desperate extra trope I've built in my head. "Watch the overhead," someone screamed. The sound was a sickening crack, the high-pitched snap of a steel safety cable under too much tension. Cross looked up. High above his chair, a heavy industrial spotlight, a massive hunk of glass and metal weighing nearly 80 pounds, had broken free from its swivel. It didn't fall straight, it swung like a pendulum, a lethal arc aimed directly at Cross's head. Time slowed into a series of jagged frames. Cross saw the shadows shift. He felt the rush of air. But his body, usually so graceful on camera, was paralyzed by a sudden, icy shock. He was a deer in the high beams. Oh, he thought with a strange, detached clarity. This is how the career ends. Crushed by a piece of equipment I've spent my life ignoring. Then, a force hit him. It wasn't the metal. It was something warm and solid. A pair of powerful arms wrapped around his chest, and Cross was yanked violently out of the chair just as the spotlight slammed into the ground. The sound was deafening, the explosion of glass, the screech of metal on concrete, exactly where Cross's head had been a second before. They tumbled onto the dusty floor, Cross pinned beneath a heavy, warm weight. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. But it wasn't just the near-death experience that made his breath hitch, it was the contact. Cross hated being touched. To him, touch was either a demand from a director or a grab for his fame. "Hey," a deep, steady voice vibrated against his ear. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" Cross's eyes snapped open. He was looking directly into the face of the man from the rigging crew. Hajin's face was inches from his eyes searching Cross's for signs of a concussion. There was no awe in those eyes. No, oh my God, I'm holding Cross Miller. Just raw, human concern. Don't touch me, Cross rasped, though his hands were instinctively clutching Hajin's forearms. Hajin didn't flinch at the venom in Cross's tone. He gently hooked his hands under Cross's armpits and hoisted him to his feet as if he weighed nothing. Once Cross was stable, Hajin let go immediately, stepping back to give him space. Check your breathing, Hajin said, his voice like calm water. You're shaking. The set erupted. Producers, medics, and cameras swarmed them. Cross. Oh God, Cross, are you all right? Marcus was screaming, pushing through the crowd. I'm fine, Cross snapped, though his knees felt like jelly. He looked for the man who had saved him. Hajin was already being pulled aside by a frantic stagehand. Hajin, your arm, the stagehand cried. Cross followed the movement. There was a jagged tear in the shoulder of Hajin's jumpsuit, and a dark smear of red was blooming across the fabric where a piece of the exploding glass had grazed him. I'm fine, Hajin told the medic, waving them off. He looked back at Cross one last time, not a lingering look of a fan, but a simple nod of, glad you're alive, and then he turned around to help the crew clear the debris. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't even mention his name. Cross stood in the center of the chaos, his expensive Santal 33 now masked by the smell of Hajin's sweat and the copper tang of blood. For the first time in his life, Cross Miller felt completely, utterly invisible, and he couldn't stop staring at the back of the man who had made him feel that way. Chapter 3, Cracks in the Armor. The aftermath of the accident was a cacophony of voices Cross wanted to drown in bleach. The producers were terrified of a lawsuit, the director was terrified of the schedule, Marcus was terrified of the insurance premiums. Cross, however, was simply, elsewhere. He sat in the VIP corner of the communal break tent, a corner he had claimed by sheer force of his icy glare. But his mind was stuck on a loop, replaying the sensation of those heavy, steady arms and the scent of salt and ozone. Most of all, he was stuck on the way the man had walked away. He didn't even wait for a thank you, Cross thought, his fingers nervously tracing the edge of his polyester sleeve. Nobody saves Cross Miller and just goes back to hauling crates. It's a script. He's supposed to ask for a recommendation or a selfie. He's supposed to want something. The debt felt like a physical weight on Cross's chest. He hated owing people. It felt like a crack in his armor. Marcus, Cross snapped, interrupting his agent's frantic phone call. The guy. The one who lunged. Find out where he is. The medic looked at him. Cross, he's fine. I didn't ask if he was breathing, I asked where he is, Cross hissed, standing up. He found Hajin at the far end of the catering line, sitting on an overturned plastic bucket away from the main group. He was holding a small, bruised apple and a plastic container of lukewarm pasta. The sleeve of his jumpsuit had been rolled up, revealing a neat white bandage over his bicep. As Cross approached, the usual Red Sea effect happened, the other extras parted, their whispers following him like a wake of bubbles. Hajin didn't look up until Cross's shadow fell directly over his food. He blinked, squinting against the sun, and then a slow, easy smile touched his lips. The star lives, Hajin said. His voice was even deeper when it wasn't shouted over falling metal. You're bleeding, Cross said, pointing at the bandage with a manicured finger. It was the least graceful opening line he'd ever delivered. It's a scratch. The light did more damage to your chair, Hajin replied, taking a bite of his apple. He gestured to another bucket nearby. You want a seat? I'd offer you the chair, but, well. Cross looked at the plastic bucket with genuine horror, then back at Hajin. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a sleek, leather cardholder. I don't like being in debt, Cross said, his tone returning to its usual clipped arrogance. Write down your bank details. Or your agent's number. I'll make sure you're moved to a speaking role by tomorrow. Consider the hero act paid for. Hajin stopped chewing. He looked at the cardholder, then up at Cross's face. For a moment, Cross expected him to jump at the chance. Instead, Hajin let out a short, huffed laugh. A hero act. Hajin shook his head, leaning back. I moved you because you were in the way of a very expensive light, Mr. Miller. And because I'm pretty sure the paperwork for a dead actor is a nightmare. I'm being serious. Cross stepped closer, his frustration bubbling. What do you want? Money? A lead? Don't play the saint with me. Everyone wants something. Hajin stood up then. He was taller than Cross, not by much, but enough that Cross had to tilt his head back. He smelled of wood smoke and cheap soap. How about a cracker? Hajin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crinkly package of peanut butter crackers. He held them out. You haven't eaten all day. You've been sitting in that corner looking like you're about to bite the furniture. Eat something. That's all I want. Cross stared at the orange crackers as if they were live explosives. You're joking. I'm Hajin, the man said, ignoring the rejection. He took Cross's hand, a bold move that should have triggered a meltdown, and pressed the crackers into his palm. His skin was calloused and warm, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned coldness Cross usually lived in. And you're welcome, by the way. Hajin turned and walked back toward the rigging line, whistling a tune Cross didn't recognize. For the rest of the day, the set of The Background witnessed a miracle. Cross Miller didn't complain about the heat. He didn't demand a private fan. When the director told him to move a prop, he actually picked it up. He was muted. His mind was too busy trying to process the crackers in his pocket and the way Hajin's energy seemed to anchor the entire chaotic set. Every few minutes, Cross's eyes would drift, unbidden, magnetic, to the tall man in the gray jumpsuit. Hajin Park, he thought, testing the name in the silence of his mind. Why does he look so much freer than I am? Chapter 4, The Secluded Coffee Date. The weekend arrived like a gasp of air for a drowning man. Cross had spent 48 hours staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over a contact name he practically extorted from the production director. Hajin Park. He had composed and deleted a dozen texts. I owe you an apology. Meet me for a drink. I have more questions about the crackers. Every draft felt too desperate or too arrogant. Finally, he'd settled on coffee. Saturday. 10 a.m. I'll send a car. Hajin had replied, I'll meet you there. Just send the address. No car needed. Cross chose the Velvet Bean, a cafe so tucked away in a limestone alleyway that even the most dedicated paparazzi couldn't find it without a map and a prayer. He arrived 20 minutes early, wearing a heavy trench coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and oversized sunglasses, the I'm a celebrity, don't look at me starter pack that usually did the exact opposite. He was nursing a double-shot espresso, his leg bouncing nervously under the table, when the bell chimed. Hajin walked in wearing a simple navy hoodie and jeans. He looked refreshed, his skin glowing without the layer of set dust. He spotted Cross immediately, mostly because Cross was the only person in the shop dressed like a spy from a 1940s noir film. You know, Hajin said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without waiting for an invitation, you'd blend in better if you didn't look like you were hiding a body. Cross pulled off his glasses, his pale eyes narrowed. I have a reputation to protect, Hajin. I can't be seen in public with an extra. Hajin finished, a playful glint in his eyes. He waved over the barista and ordered a large, sugary caramel macchiato. It's okay. I'll tell everyone I'm your bodyguard. It's technically true. For the first 10 minutes, the silence was thick. Cross watched Hajin dismantle a blueberry muffin with terrifying efficiency. Why are you doing it? Cross asked suddenly. The acting. You saved my life with the reflexes of a pro athlete, yet you're content standing in the background of a soap opera for minimum wage. What's the end game? Fame? Money? Hajin wiped a crumb from his lip, his expression softening into something thoughtful. Honestly? I'm just here because of my best friend, Miho. He's the one who wants to be the next big thing. He begged me to come to the casting so he wouldn't be nervous. Then, on the second day, he met a girl in the makeup department and ditched the production to take her to the beach. Cross blinked. And you stayed? Why? Hajin shrugged. The production was short-handed. I had 2 weeks of vacation from my actual job. I do landscape design, and I figured, why not? It's interesting to see how the world is built from the back. You see things the stars don't. Like what? Like how lonely you look, Hajin said directly. Cross felt as if he'd been slapped. He went to reach for his espresso, but his hand trembled slightly. I'm not lonely. I'm selective. Sure, Hajin smiled, and it wasn't a mocking smile. It was kind. So, what's your excuse? Why did you start? You don't exactly seem to enjoy the fame part of it. Cross looked out the window at the rain beginning to streak the glass. Why did I start? I wasn't good at anything else, Cross admitted, his voice barely a whisper. In school, I was the kid who stared out the window. I wasn't fast enough for sports. I wasn't smart enough for the sciences. But I realized early on that if I put on a certain face, or said words in a certain rhythm, people would stop looking at me and start looking at the character. It was a way to disappear while being center stage. He looked back at Hajin. I can memorize 500 pages of dialogue in a night. But I don't know what to do with myself when there's no script. I just fill the time. Parties and scandals? Hajin asked gently. It's loud, Cross said. It stops me from hearing the silence in my apartment. They talked for 2 hours. They didn't talk about the industry or the A-list life. They talked about the way the rain smelled, the best places to get spicy rice cakes at 3 a.m., and how Hajin liked to plant oak trees because they outlived the people who planted them. When they stepped out of the cafe, the air was cool and crisp. Cross insisted on dropping Hajin off, his sleek black sports car idling loudly in the quiet neighborhood. As Hajin hopped out, he leaned back into the window. Thanks for the coffee, Cross. You're a better person than the tabloids say you are. You just need to stop acting for 5 minutes. Hajin jogged toward his apartment building, disappearing through the door with a final wave. Cross drove back to his penthouse in a daze. He entered his living room, a masterpiece of chrome, marble, and white leather. It was pristine. It was perfect. And as he stood in the center of the vast, silent space, he realized for the first time that it wasn't a home. It was a set. He pulled a small, crinkly package of peanut butter crackers from his pocket, the ones he'd kept since the day of the accident. He didn't eat them. He just held them, feeling the pull of Hajin's energy even from miles away, wondering when the void in his chest had started to feel so much like a heartbeat. Chapter 5, The Blurred Lens. The following Tuesday, the world didn't wake up to a sunrise, it woke up to a notification. Cross was in the makeup trailer, his eyes closed as a brush dusted translucent powder over his cheekbones. The silence was shattered by the frantic, rhythmic ping-ping-ping of Marcus's phone. It sounded like a digital cardiac arrest. Cross, Marcus whispered, his voice sounding like he'd swallowed glass. Don't look at social media. Naturally, Cross snatched his phone off the vanity immediately. There it was. Headlining every major tabloid from Seoul to New York. The photo was grainy, shot through a rainy window at the Velvet Bean, but the profiles were unmistakable. Cross, leaning in, his guard down, his eyes fixed on Hajin with an intensity he'd never shown a female co-star. The second photo showed them standing outside, Hajin's hand lingering near Cross's shoulder as they said goodbye. The mask slips, Cross Miller's secret romance with set hand. Is the bad boy gone gay? The comments section was a war zone. I knew those cheekbones were too perfect for a straight man, one read. Disgusting. My kids watch his movies, read another. But beneath the vitriol was a surge of support that Cross didn't know how to handle. If Cross is happy, we're happy. Power couple. Cross felt a cold sweat break across his neck. It wasn't the gay label that terrified him, it was the exposure. His entire life was built on artifice, on being whatever the audience wanted. Now, a blurred photo of a genuine moment had stripped him bare. They're looking at me, he thought, his chest tightening. Not the character. Not the bad boy. They're looking at Cross. He stepped out of the trailer and into a gauntlet. The variety show crew, usually respectful of his space, were staring. The cameras of the production were rolling, catching his every flinch for content. Then he saw the dark side of the internet. A group of protesters had gathered at the studio gates, holding signs. Even worse were the fans, men sending him graphic, inappropriate photos via DMs, assuming that because he was outed, he was suddenly public property. Where is he? Cross demanded, pushing past a producer. Cross, stay away from him. Marcus hissed, jogging to keep up. We're drafting a statement. We'll say he's a distant cousin. A trainer. A stalker. Anything but the truth. Get out of my way, Marcus. He found Hajin by the equipment truck, calmly coiling a heavy rope. He looked exactly the same as he had the day before, unbothered, steady, and remarkably, calm as a cucumber. Hajin, Cross breathed, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I'll have my lawyers handle this. We'll scrub your name, we'll get the photos taken down. Hajin stopped his work and looked at Cross. There was no panic in his eyes. No anger. He actually looked amused. Why are you sorry, Cross? Because. Cross gestured wildly at the gates, at the cameras, at the world. Your life is ruined. They're calling me, they're saying we're. He couldn't even say the word. Hajin stepped closer, invading Cross's personal bubble. They're saying you're gay. Is that a problem for you? I've never, Cross stammered, his heart racing. It's not about me. It's about what they're doing to you. Hajin leaned against the truck, crossing his arms. Cross, I've been out since I was 19. My parents know, my boss knows, and clearly, the internet now knows. I'm a muscular guy who hauls crates, I don't fit their stereotype, so they're confused. But I'm not. I'm gay. The only person here having a crisis is you. Cross froze. The words hit him like the falling spotlight all over again. I'm gay. Hajin said it so simply, as if he were stating the weather. Cross looked at Hajin, really looked at him. He saw the strength in his jaw, the kindness in his eyes, and the absolute lack of shame. For 28 years, Cross had dated starlets and models, following the PR handbook to the letter, always wondering why he felt like he was playing a role he hadn't rehearsed. Am I, like him? Cross wondered. The thought sent a jolt of electricity through his spine. Did I like him because he saved me, or did I like him because for the first time, I felt a pull towards someone that wasn't scripted? He looked at Hajin's mouth, then quickly looked away, his face flushing a deep, hot crimson. He was the most famous actor in the country, and he was currently being schooled in courage by an extra. I have to go, Cross whispered, turning on his heel. Cross, Hajin called out. Cross stopped but didn't turn around. The world is going to talk regardless, Hajin said softly. You might as well give them something worth talking about. Cross fled to his trailer, the word gay echoing in his head, no longer sounding like a scandal, but like a key turning in a very old, very rusty lock. Chapter 6, The Cucumber Confession. The final week of the background was a blur of flashing bulbs and stifled whispers. Cross had finished the show like a ghost, moving through his final scenes with a mechanical precision that masked a mounting internal storm. The moment the director yelled, "Wrap!" Cross hadn't stayed for the champagne. He hadn't said goodbye to the crew. He had vanished into the tinted sanctuary of his car, fleeing the set like a man running from a crime scene. Now, 10 days later, the world outside his penthouse didn't exist. Cross stood on his balcony, the city of Seoul spread out beneath him like a carpet of diamonds, but he felt like he was looking at a painting through thick glass. Inside, the penthouse was a mess of neglected luxury. Expensive silk shirts were strewn over the marble counters, scripts for new queer cinema projects, the vultures were already circling, lay rejected on the floor. He hadn't touched them. He couldn't. Am I just a trend now, he wondered, pouring himself a drink he didn't really want. The tragic outed star. Is that the only role I have left? Every time he closed his eyes, he didn't see the scripts or the headlines. He saw Hajin. He saw the way Hajin had stood his ground while the world burned, calm as a deep forest. He thought about the men who had sent him those supportive photos, men he found repulsive, not because they were men, but because they weren't him. Cross looked at his phone. It was silent. He had been waiting for Hajin to call, to demand an explanation, to ask for money, anything. But Hajin hadn't reached out. He was back to his trees, back to his ordinary life, leaving Cross alone in his ivory tower. The silence of the penthouse became deafening. Cross realized he was waiting for a script to tell him how to feel. He was waiting for a director to tell him where to stand. There is no director here, he realized, his grip tightening on his glass. There's just me. And I'm miserable. He picked up the phone. His fingers shook as he dialed the number he had memorized but never dared to call since the scandal. Hajin. Cross's voice was thin, stripped of its cinematic resonance. Cross. I was wondering when you'd get tired of hiding. Hajin's voice was warm, a low rumble that instantly grounded Cross's soaring anxiety. I'm at the penthouse. I think I'm losing my mind. Can you come? Please. 40 minutes later, the private elevator chimed. Hajin stepped out, looking wildly out of place in Cross's hypermodern foyer. He was wearing a flannel shirt and work boots, smelling faintly of damp earth and cedar. Nice place, Hajin said, looking around. A bit cold, though. Like a museum. I don't know what I'm doing, Hajin, Cross said, pacing the length of the floor. He didn't look like an A-lister. He looked like a boy lost in a department store. They're offering me roles with male partners. They're calling me a brave icon. But I don't feel brave. I feel like a liar. I feel like I've been acting in my real life for 28 years and I don't know who the person under the costume is. Hajin walked over, stopping the pacing by simply standing in Cross's path. Is that why you rejected the projects? Because you're repulsed by the idea of being with a man? Cross stopped. He looked up at Hajin, really looked at him. He saw the faint scar on Hajin's arm from the spotlight accident, a permanent mark Cross had caused. No, Cross whispered. I'm not repulsed. I'm terrified. Because when I think about it, when I think about being with a man, I don't think about men in general. I just think about you. You make me feel like I'm not Cross Miller. You make me feel like I'm just some guy. And I've never wanted to be just some guy until I met you. Hajin watched him, his expression unreadable for a long, agonizing moment. Then, he reached out, his large, calloused hand cupping the side of Cross's jaw. Maybe you've been fooling yourself for a long time, Cross, Hajin said softly. Maybe you weren't looking for a role. Maybe you were just waiting for someone to see through the one you were playing. Cross leaned into the touch, his eyes fluttering shut. The void in his chest, the one he'd been filling with scandals and parties, suddenly felt as if it were being filled with something solid. Something real. I think. Cross began, his breath hitching as Hajin stepped even closer. I think I've been acting for so long that I forgot how to want things. But I want this. I want you. Hajin didn't wait for the rest of the monologue. He leaned down, his lips brushing against Cross's in a question that didn't need words. And for the first time in his life, Cross didn't think about the lighting, the angles, or the audience. He just felt. Chapter 7, The Penthouse Revelation. The air in the penthouse, usually sterile and cold, suddenly felt heavy with an electric charge. The kiss was nothing like the cinematic ones Cross had performed for cameras. There was no soft lighting, no director's action, and no faked breathlessness. This was raw. It was the friction of two different worlds finally colliding. When Hajin's lips met his, Cross's first instinct was to perform, to tilt his head just so, to manage his breathing. But then he felt the rough texture of Hajin's thumb against his cheek and the steady, solid weight of a man who didn't care about angles. Cross's carefully constructed walls didn't just crumble, they evaporated. If you aren't sure, Hajin whispered against his lips, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a shiver straight down Cross's spine. We stop. Right now. I'm not a script you have to follow, Cross. Cross looked up at him, his pale eyes blown wide with a mix of terror and hunger. For a second, the old Cross, the one who feared the headlines and the PR nightmare, screamed at him to run. But then he looked at Hajin's calm, patient expression. Hajin wasn't demanding anything, he was offering a choice. Don't stop, Cross rasped, his voice breaking. He reached up, his fingers trembling as he locked them behind Hajin's thick neck, pulling him back down. Please. For once in my life, don't let me think. As they moved toward the bedroom, the transition was a frantic blur of friction and heat. The A-list polish was stripped away with every piece of clothing that hit the floor. The designer's silk was cast aside for the reality of skin against skin. In the dim light of the bedroom, Cross felt a wave of vulnerability he wasn't prepared for. He was used to being looked at, but he wasn't used to being seen. As Hajin's hands explored the line of his ribs and the curve of his waist, Cross realized that his body had been a tool for his career for so long that he'd forgotten it could be a source of connection. Hajin was gentle, yet there was an undeniable possessiveness in the way he moved. He was a man who worked with his hands, who understood the weight of things, and he handled Cross with a reverent intensity. You're shaking, Hajin murmured, his lips tracing the sensitive line of Cross's throat. I've never. Cross started, his breath hitching as Hajin's teeth grazed his collarbone. I never thought it would feel like this. I thought I was broken. I thought I was just empty. You're not empty, Hajin replied, looking him dead in the eye, grounding him. You're just finally home. When they finally merged, the sensation was overwhelming. Cross let out a choked sound, half sob and half gasp, burying his face in the crook of Hajin's neck. He bit down on Hajin's shoulder to keep from screaming, the pressure in his chest finally exploding into a kaleidoscope of feeling. Hajin moved with a steady, rhythmic power, his hands marking Cross, fingertips pressing into his hips, lips leaving blooming heat across his chest and down to his thighs. It wasn't just sex, it was a reclamation. Hajin was marking him, not as a celebrity or a scandal, but as his. Hours later, the room was silent, save for the hum of the city far below. The moonlight spilled across the bed, highlighting the marks Hajin had left, the physical proof that Cross Miller was no longer an untouchable icon. Cross lay tangled in the high thread count sheets, his head resting on Hajin's broad, scarred chest. He listened to the steady thump-thump of Hajin's heart and felt a peace so profound it was almost frightening. I was so scared of being gay, Cross thought, his fingers tracing the bandage on Hajin's arm. But I was really just scared of being real. I was scared that if I stopped acting, there would be nothing left. But there's this. There's him. He didn't care about the projects he'd rejected or the men sending him photos. None of them mattered. Only the man holding him, who smelled of cedar and the honest work of a day spent in the sun, was real. For the first time in 28 years, Cross Miller wasn't wondering what his next line was. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 8, Marking Territory. The morning sun didn't ask for permission. It bled through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse, turning the minimalist white room into a chamber of pale gold. Cross woke slowly, his senses returning in layers. First, the weight, a heavy, warm arm draped over his waist, pinning him to the mattress with a comforting pressure. Then, the scent, no longer just expensive sandal, but the musky, honest smell of sleep and Hajin. Finally, the feeling, a dull, rhythmic ache in his muscles that served as a vivid map of everything that had happened the night before. For the first time in years, Cross didn't reach for his phone the moment his eyes opened. He didn't check the trades, the trending topics, or his mentions. He just stayed still, watching the dust motes dance in the light. He shifted slightly, wincing at the stiffness in his hips. Beside him, Hajin stirred. The muscular man groaned softly, his grip tightening instinctively on Cross before his eyes cracked open. He looked sleep-muddled and dangerously handsome, his hair a chaotic mess against the silk pillowcase. "Morning," Hajin rumbled, his voice even deeper with sleep. He leaned in, pressing a lazy, dry kiss to the curve of Cross's shoulder, right on top of a faint, darkening mark he'd left there. "You're a morning person," Cross accused, though there was no bite in his tone. "That should be illegal." Hajin huffed a laugh, propping himself up on one elbow. He looked at Cross, not at the A-list star, but at the man with messy hair and swollen lips. "I'm a seeing what's next person. How are you feeling? Any regrets?" Cross looked at his own hands, then at the room around him. The penthouse suddenly looked different. It was still expensive, still grand, but it didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a place where a life could actually happen. "I feel." Cross paused, searching for the word. "Heavy. But in a good way. Like I finally have enough ballast to keep from drifting away." The peace was momentarily interrupted by the distant, muffled sound of a buzzing phone on the nightstand. Cross didn't have to look to know what it was. Marcus, the studio, the media, the world was still screaming for a piece of him. "You should probably answer that," Hajin said, though he didn't move to let go. "Let them wait," Cross replied. He turned onto his side, facing Hajin. "For 10 years, I've lived for the noise. I've been a walking PR nightmare because I thought if I made enough of a mess, someone would eventually see through the smoke and find me. I didn't realize I just needed to stop the fire." He reached out, his fingers tracing the rugged line of Hajin's jaw. "They're going to keep talking, you know. They're going to call us a scandal. They're going to say I've lost my mind." Hajin caught Cross's hand and kissed the palm. "Let them. I'm pretty good at landscaping. If the acting thing falls through, I can teach you how to plant a tree. You'd look good in a flannel, Miller. A bit too pretty for it, maybe, but we'll make it work." Cross laughed, a real, genuine sound that didn't belong in a romantic comedy. It was jagged and beautiful. He realized then that he didn't need to reject the gay roles or fear the labels. He didn't need to be the bad boy or the ice king. He just needed to be the man who sat in a secluded coffee shop and talked about the rain. He looked at Hajin, the extra, who had saved his life and then proceeded to dismantle it piece by piece until only the truth was left. In the quiet of the morning, the void that had haunted Cross for a decade was gone. He wasn't waiting for a script anymore. He was living the scene. "Hajin?" "Yeah." "Don't go back to the friend who ditched you," Cross whispered, pulling the covers up around them both. "I think I'd like to keep you in the foreground for a while." Hajin smiled, pulling Cross back into his chest, his heart beating a steady, permanent rhythm against Cross's back. "I'm not going anywhere, Cross. The view from here is way better than the background." As the city roared to life 60 floors below, Cross Miller closed his eyes and drifted back to sleep, finally, undeniably complete.